and chemical. People go away because their water is polluted. The showcase is not the right word, but the par excellence example of this was the Bhopal tragedy. Okay, and armed conflicts. People do move following armed conflicts, and sometimes the environment plays a role in this conflict. Okay, finally, as I mentioned, climate change exacerbates all the pre-existing factors that lead people to move and adds the potential for sea level rise. Okay. So, my particular take, what I want to share with you, is the legal framework within which this operates. And like the more empirical framework, it's a bit messy, and it hasn't and people have different takes on it coming from different perspectives. So the different takes that people have is that you'll have environmental lawyers coming from an environmental law perspective and focusing on adaptation and mitigation. You'll have a humanitarian law looking at disaster and disaster assistance. You'll have immigration law coming at it from a refugee and immigration law perspective. And from that, we have, I guess, different interest groups in part. Under refugee law, there is an interest in making sure that what we see as a refugee is not expanded, because there is a sense that that might dilute what we currently think of as the refugee. And so we have a normative gap. Because these three areas are not very well coordinated at the moment, there are holes, and we'll see those in a minute. Okay, next. Can I just get my water? So, yes, there is a difference in terminology. So what is the terminology used and why does it matter? The reason it matters to lawyers, the definitions are always very important because they govern who gets the rights and who in any particular instance is going to be protected. So it's all very well to speak about environmental migrants in a general sense, but there needs to be a way to say, are we going to afford protection, or this group spend adaptation money on it? So it is important whether we consider them environmental refugees, environmental migrants, environmentally displaced persons, climate refugees, climate migrants. And I'll go through that definition now. One thing you see in the literature and is often an overbroad, as I mentioned, overbroad use that would capture all of them in one definition. And that has its problems because it's very hard to know how we can afford rights or protection. Okay, so just quickly running through, environmental refugees is often used in the literature. It arose in the 1980s. It's used in a general sense, but it is rejected by UNHCR as the right concept. It's rejected by a lot of other authors because they say they don't want to dilute the refugee concept, and it's not part of current international law. I'll give you my take on that in a minute. In terms of environmental migrants, so often you see proposed as an alternative the idea of environmental migrants. Now, again, the criticism of calling them environmental migrants is it connotes that they're doing this voluntarily. They're leaving their homes voluntarily, and they're not. I mean, if you have a natural disaster and you have to leave, if there's a tsunami, if there's an earthquake, there's no choice involved. So that is the critique in relation to calling people environmental migrants. And so often you see people using, or environmentally displaced persons. And that tends to be a more neutral term, and it's my preferred term is environmentally displaced person and population, and talking about population movements even more than migration. Climate refugees, climate migrants are a subcategory of any of the above. Okay, next slide. So just very, very quickly, we won't spend long on this because I've made the point. Article 1 of it's the 1951 Convention relating to the status of refugees talks about people with a well-founded fear of being persecuted for reasons of race or religion, nationality, or membership of a particular social group. So I think there is general agreement that this is not applicable to environmental refugees, climate refugees. And so to give them the protections that those sort of that convention affords requires changing this definition. Now, my view, next slide. I'll just quickly, actually go to the next slide, we can come back to this. But if we're all talking about refugees, and if we talk about our plain meaning, a refugee is someone who's seeking refuge, who's looking somewhere. Now, definitions are just, lawyers can define anything. I once remember a partner in a law firm telling me it doesn't matter, we can call it a banana if we define it in a particular way, and that's absolutely correct. So it's not about the fact that the convention under international law says the refugees are this and so you can't have environmental refugees. If law needs changing, one can change it, or one can redefine something under a different normative context. So if it's necessary, and as we'll go through in the categorisation, I think in some cases it is actually helpful to call these displaced persons refugees, people seeking refuge. And the clear example of this is the submergence of small islands, the Maldives, Kiribati, Tuvalu. When they go under, when they're looking for somewhere, they're clearly refugees, and my preferred term is to call that environmental refugees or climate refugees. Okay, and just going back again, why worry about terminology? We've mentioned to know who to protect and also count. All these figures on environmentally displaced persons are based on different definitions and different ideas and different assumptions about who the people actually are. So until we have some sort of clarity and consensus in the literature as to what counts as an environmentally displaced person, the numbers are guesswork. Okay, and so what I argue is we need to disaggregate the definition. We need to break it down. We talked about the causes a moment ago of people moving. We need to align the causes. Okay, we need to align the causes with different ideas of movement. Actually, go down another one more. And again. Ooh, and again.